وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أنه قال إن خسفت الشمس على عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فصلى فقام قياما طويلا نحوا من قراءة سورة البقرة ثم ركع ركوعا طويلا ثم رفع فقام قياما طويلا وهو دون القيام الأول ثم ركع ركوعا طويلا وهو دون الركوع الأول ثم سجد ثم قام قياما طويلا وهو دون القيام الأول ثم ركع ركوعا طويلا وهو دون الركوع الأول ثم رفع فقام قياما طويلا وهو دون القيام الأول ثم ركع ركوعا طويلا وهو دون الركوع الأول ثم رفع رأسه ثم سجد ثم انصرف وقد تجلت الشمس فخطب الناس متفق عليه. وفي رواية لمسلم صلى حين كسفت الشمس 8 ركعات في 4 سجدات. وعن علي رضي الله عنه مثل ذلك. This is the hadith of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, and this hadith in reality complements the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, and in reality you need both of them to understand the other one. So if you were to take the hadith of Ibn Abbas on its own, there are certain elements that you might misunderstand out of that hadith. And if you were to take the hadith of Aisha alone, there would be some elements that maybe also could be misunderstood or would not have enough detail in it. But when we take these two ahadith together, they clearly explain to us the prayer which is for the eclipse. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he said, in khasafati shams, the sun became eclipsed during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he prayed. We said that the sun only became eclipsed one time. It only became eclipsed one time during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason we said that is you can't join between the ahadith by saying that it happened at different times, because what we know is that it only happened once. So we have to find a way to reconcile between this hadith and between the other ahadith on the topic. So he stood for a long time, the equivalent of reciting Surah Al-Baqarah. Some of the scholars understood something from this. Why did Ibn Abbas say the equivalent of? Why did Ibn Abbas say the equivalent of? And he didn't say he read Surah Al-Baqarah. He said he stood for the equivalent length of Surah Al-Baqarah. نحوا من قراءة Surah Al-Baqarah. Does that mean that the eclipse prayer was read silently? And that it is Ibn Abbas's estimation that the length was roughly the length of Surah Al-Baqarah? The hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha tells us that the salah was read aloud. So if we go back to the hadith of Aisha, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم جهر في صلاة الكسوف بقراءته, that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم read loudly during the eclipse prayer. So here Aisha clearly says that he read aloud. She makes a statement, an authoritative statement. He read aloud. Ibn Abbas doesn't make a statement, he read silently. He doesn't say he read silently. What he says is the length was roughly the length of Surah Al-Baqarah. The mafhum of this could be, or the understanding we could take from this is that the Prophet ﷺ was reading silently. But since we know it was one event, and since Aisha clearly said that he was reading aloud, what we can say here is that Ibn Abbas here saying approximately the length of Surah Al-Baqarah doesn't mean that he was reading quietly. As for the meaning of it, we don't have a clear evidence one way or the other. Did the Prophet ﷺ stop before he read the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, or did he read only a part of it, or was it Ibn Abbas estimating the time that he was silent as well as the time that he was reading? But in any case, what we know is that he read aloud. We know that he read aloud. Then he bowed a long bowing. He bowed a long bowing. And we've mentioned that before, that the bowing in the Eclipse prayer is a long bowing. It's not a short bowing. It's not that you bow, just for Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. Instead, the bowing is a prolonged bowing. Then he stood up. ثم رفع فقام قياما طويلا وهو دون القيام الأول. Then he stood for a long time, but less than the first time. He stood for a long time, but less than the first time. So if we go back to the if we go back to the first hadith that we did, maybe it's going to come. In any case, that the standing in this rak'ah, it might have been in the explanation of the first hadith that we did, that the standing in this rak'ah was less than the standing in the first. So the recitation was not as long as the standing in the first. Okay, up to now we've done Surah Al-Baqarah and the rukoo and the next standing, which is less than the first. ثم ركع ركوعا طويلا وهو دون الركوع الأول. Then he made rukoo, a long rukoo. So it's again, the bowing is a long bowing. It's not the short Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. It's a long one, but it's not as long as the first one. It's not as long as the first one. ثم سجد. Then he made sajda. Now here, then he made sajda. Ibn Abbas doesn't mention he made sajda twice, or he made sajda and then he sat. But that is understood from the context here, that Ibn Abbas is not giving you the details. Then he made sajda, then he said Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, then he sat, then he said Rabbi ighfirli, then he made sajda. Ibn Abbas is summarizing for you the parts that are different. Thumma sajad, meaning that he did the two sajdas. Then he stood for a long time, but less, وَهُوَ دُونَ الْقِيَامِ الْأَوَّلِ, but less than the first time. So in the second rak'ah, again, he stood for a long recitation, but it was less than the first time. Then he made rukoo for a long time, but it was less than the first time. Then he stood up for a long time, and it was less than the first time. Then he made rukoo for a long time, and it was less than the first time. Then he raised his head. Then he made sajda. Then he completed his prayer, and he left while the sun had become uncovered, and he gave a khutbah to the people. So in this hadith of Ibn Abbas, what do we have? We have 4 recitations. We have 4 recitations. And we have, how many bowings did we have in the hadith? 4 bowings. For each recitation there is a rukoo. So 4 recitations and 4 bowings. And how many sajda? 2 or 4? He made sajda twice in 2 sets of the rak'at. Thumma sajad comes twice, which is 4 sajdas in total. And in the narration of Muslim, 8 bowings and 4 sajdas. 8 bowings and 4 sajdas. This is the second description. Remember when we broke down the Eclipse prayer down into the different options, the different possibilities of praying it, and we said that one of the ways that it has been narrated is it has been narrated as 8 bowings and 4 sajda. So if there are 8 bowings, there are only 2 rak'at. So if there are 8, that means that there are 4 bowings in 1 rak'ah. What else is narrated? Also 3 is narrated. And also 2 is narrated. But what is the well-known one? The well-known one is that there are 2 in each rak'ah. So in a rak'ah, you have the same number of bowings as you have sajda, right? Let's go back through the hadith of Ibn Abbas and let's go through that. So, standing the length of Surah Al-Baqarah, then a rukoo, that's 1 rukoo. Then standing, that's now 2 standings, or 2 recitations. Then rukoo. Then you have standing up and going straight, going into sajda. That's just a normal Rabbana wa lakal hamd and then into sajda. Okay, so far we had 2 recitations and 2 bowings. And then 2 sajdas. 2, 2, 2. And then again in the second rak'ah, we have in the hadith of Ibn Abbas exactly the same. 2, 2, 2. 2 recitations, 2 bowings, and 2 sajda. In the narration of Muslim, we have 8 bowings, which must mean 8 recitations, and 8 bowings, and only 4 sajda, which must mean 4 in each rak'ah. So as we said, that it is narrated with 2 recitations in each rak'ah, and it's narrated with 3 recitations in each rak'ah, and it's narrated with 4 recitations in each rak'ah. As for the narration of 3, it comes in this hadith. وَلَهُ عَنْ جَابِرٍ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ أَنَّهُ صَلَّى 6 رَكَعَاتٍ بِأَرْبَعِ سَجَدَاتٍ. That the Prophet ﷺ prayed 6 raka'at with 4 sajda. So 6 divided by 2 into 2 raka'ah. One raka'ah has 3 bowings and the other raka'ah has 3 bowings. So Jabir narrated 3 plus 3. In the narration of Muslim from Ibn Abbas, 4 plus 4. But the one that is in both, the one that is narrated by both Bukhari and Muslim, and the one that is supported by the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, which is also narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, is 2 recitations and 2 bowings and 2 sajda in each rak'ah. In each rak'ah. And that is the one that we usually do, or that is the one that we typically do when we perform the Eclipse prayer. Is that in each rak'ah of the prayer, there are 2 rak'at. In each one, we do 2 recitations, 2 bowings, and 2 sajda. And that is the reason we do that is, as we said, to the best of our knowledge, it only happened once. And because it only happened once, that means we have to prefer one of these ahadith over the other. The hadith of Ibn Abbas, narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, and the hadith of Aisha, narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, go together. There's no contradiction between them. As for the extra narrations in Sahih Muslim, here now we have a problem because we have a conflict. Because it's not possible that he prayed 8 bowings and he prayed 4 bowings. He either did 8 or he either did 4. And likewise, the hadith of Jabir, which is also narrated by Muslim, if I'm not mistaken. Now, it's also narrated by Muslim, the hadith of Jabir, which is the 3 in each rak'ah, 3 bowings and 3 recitations. So because this only happened once, and because we don't know of any evidence that it ever happened more than once, we have to prefer one over the other. And this is where people ask the question about things like why we give attention to what is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, why we give attention to the difference between Sahih and Hasan, and if they're all authentic, why do we distinguish between them? We distinguish between them because of cases like this, where you can prefer a hadith which is narrated, and there's different reasons why we prefer the hadith of Bukhari and Muslim here. First of all, this hadith is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim as opposed to the other hadith which is narrated by Muslim on his own. So the level of authenticity is higher. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's narrated by more than one companion, as opposed to the other ahadith which are narrated by individual companions. So we have more than one reason to prefer the hadith of Aisha and Ibn Abbas together with the narration of Bukhari and Muslim, which is that in each of the 2 rak'at, we pray 2 recitations and 2 bowings and 2 sajda in each one. We then have a hadith narrated by Abi Dawood, which adds a 4th way of praying. وَلِأَبِي دَاوُدْ عن أبي بن كعب رضي الله عنه صلى فركع 5 ركعات وسجد سجدتين وفعل في الثانية مثل ذلك. From Abu Dawood, it's narrated by Ubay ibn Ka'b رضي الله عنه that the Prophet ﷺ prayed this prayer and he made 5 bowings and 2 sajda. Then he did the same in the 2nd rak'ah. In the first rak'ah, he made 5 bowings and 2 sajda. So here would be 5 recitation, 5 bowings, but just the 2 sajda. And again, what we say here is that we prefer the hadith that is narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim, and the hadith that is narrated by more than one of the companions. And in this case, what we do is we make a case of preference where it's not like we have rejected the other ahadith, but the case is that we have put that hadith forward because it has certain evidences which make it stronger than the other wordings. Especially since this only happened once and you can't reconcile by saying that it happened 3 or 4 times, and each time, one time it was 2 and one time it was 3 and one time it was 4 and one time it was 5. Here we gotta prefer one of them over the other. And the way we're going to prefer it is because they're narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, the level of authenticity is higher, and because they're narrated by more than one companion, then the level of authenticity is higher. And because of those 2 things together, we can come across and we can establish that the right way to pray the Eclipse prayer is to pray 2 recitations and 2 bowings in each rak'ah. If someone does more than that, they have an evidence for it. It's not like they've done more than that and they have no evidence, or they've done more than that and they've added something that was never known in the religion. They have an evidence and they have a reason for doing it. But we believe that this evidence is not as strong as the evidence for doing 2 bowings and 2 recitations. We go through the benefits that the Shaykh mentions from the explanation of this hadith. He says in the first benefit that it contains a refutation of the beliefs of the star worshippers and the people who believe in astrology, who say that things happen on the earth depending on what happens with the star, with these what they call the heavenly bodies, like the sun and the moon and the stars. And as the Shaykh said, وَهَذَا شِرْكٌ بِاللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. This is a act of polytheism, and it's the same thing that the people of Ibrahim used to do when they worshipped the stars. And they used to build temples in which they worshipped the stars, and there is no difference between this and between the one who attributes events on the earth to happening because of the sun and the moon and the stars, like sun worshippers, moon worshippers, star worshippers, horoscopes, astrology, all of this belief that the stars influence events on the earth, or that the bodies in the heaven like the sun and the moon influence events on the earth. These ahadith have a clear evidence that the sun and the moon are 2 signs from the signs of Allah, and that the sun and the moon do not have any connection to things happening like people dying or people being born, or people, something good happening to people or something bad happening to people. The second issue that the Shaykh mentions, he says, in these ahadith, there is an evidence for the permissibility of establishing the eclipse prayer when these things happen, and when the sun is eclipsed or when the moon is eclipsed. And he said this is a matter of ijma', but they differed. Is it a sunnah or is it obligatory? And the Shaykh said, وَالصَّحِيحُ أَنَّهَا سُنَّةٌ وَلَيْسَتْ وَاجِبَةٌ. The correct opinion is that it's a sunnah and it's not wajib. So the scholars had ijma', they had consensus upon the fact that you pray the eclipse prayer, what we call the mashru'iyyah, the permissibility or the fact that it's legislated for you to pray the eclipse prayer when the sun is eclipsed or when the moon is eclipsed. But they differed over whether it is a sunnah or whether it is an obligation. And the Shaykh said the correct opinion is that it is a sunnah and it's not an obligation. The third benefit from these ahadith is that the prayer is prayed in jama'ah in the masjid. This is the best thing to do. But if a person were to pray it by themselves in the house, the prayer would be accepted from them. It's acceptable if the person were to pray it in the house, but to pray it in the jama'ah, that is what is better. The fourth issue is that in this prayer, the recitation is done aloud because of the clear statement of Aisha, جَهَرَ فِيهِمَا بِالْقِرَاءَةِ, that he read both raka'at aloud. Both of the recitations he read aloud. The fifth benefit is that the eclipse prayer is called out by saying as-salatu jami'ah. We don't give the adhan and we don't give the iqamah. And in the hadith of Aisha and Ibn Abbas, there is an evidence for the way that we perform it, and that it is 2 raka'at. In each raka'ah, there are 2 bowings and 2 sajdas, and this is the preferred and the chosen way of praying it. The seventh issue is that these ahadith contain the timing for the eclipse prayer, and that the eclipse prayer begins from the beginning of the eclipse until the end of it. So it's not right for people to pray before it happens, even if the people know that it's going to happen through normal astronomy, because as we said in the introduction to the eclipse prayer, it's quite possible to know that the eclipse is going to happen through normal astronomy. Obviously, a difference between astronomy and astrology. Astrology is the shirki belief that things happen on the earth, and astronomy just the calculation of the movement of the stars and the sun and the moon and what's going to happen with them. So the astronomical belief that there's going to be an eclipse, they did some calculations and they tell you today there is going to be an eclipse. We don't start praying until the eclipse is seen itself. We don't necessarily go by the timetable. So the Shaykh, he said it's not permissible for them to pray before they have seen the eclipse with their eyes, because of the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, فَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُمَا, if you see these 2 things happening, meaning al-kusuf wal-khusuf, the sun and the moon being eclipsed. So they are dependent upon you seeing it, not necessarily upon you calculating that it will happen. Likewise, we can say with regard to the end of the eclipse, that it's not right for a person to pray longer than the eclipse is there. So if the person sees that the eclipse has been removed and the light has come back in, then what they do is you continue your prayer, but you shorten it to finish it. You shorten your prayer in order to be able to finish your prayer. What you don't do is you don't for example, you are reading Surah Al-Baqarah and the eclipse goes away. You don't finish Surah Al-Baqarah. You finish the ayah that you are up to and you make your rukoo, and if you still have a recitation, recite maybe 3 or 4 ayat and then go straight into sajda and then straight away finish the prayer. But what you don't do is continue to recite a lengthy, long rukoo, a long qiyam, a long sajda. You don't do those long things when you know that the eclipse has already gone. What you do is you finish up your prayer. But you don't stop the prayer. You don't make the qata', where you just stop praying and walk away. Because Allah Azza wa Jalla said, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا أَعْمَالَكُمْ, don't ruin your own deeds. So you don't stop a prayer unless there's a clear evidence for it. It's a general principle. That in general, as a general overriding principle, you don't stop a prayer, any sunnah prayer, any obligatory prayer, you don't stop it unless you have a Shari'i evidence for doing it. For example, what is the Shari'i evidence? We know the evidence that when the Iqamah goes, there is no prayer except for the Faridah. So we know that if you're praying a Sunnah prayer and the Iqamah goes and you can't finish the Sunnah prayer before the Imam says Allahu Akbar, then we know that you have to stop the prayer. You just leave the prayer. You don't make salam, you don't make a tashahhud. You just leave the prayer and you come and join the Fard prayer. But we don't have an evidence for in the eclipse that you stop the prayer because the sun became uncovered. Rather, what we say you do is you hasten the prayer to finish it quickly, and you conclude the prayer, and you don't lengthen the prayer beyond the length of the eclipse. Likewise, we can also establish that you don't repeat the prayer if the eclipse is still going. So this may well happen, and recently in the recent eclipse that we had, it actually happened here, that many of the imams of the masajid, what they did is they actually, by nature, they finished the prayer before the eclipse finished. So what you don't do here is you don't go and repeat another eclipse prayer. Or if you prayed with one imam and your imam finished, you don't go and pray another eclipse prayer with another imam, because that imam did it short and that imam did it long. Instead, once you've prayed an eclipse prayer, that's all you needed to do, as long as it was or as short as it was. The eighth issue. In the hadith of Ibn Abbas, we have an evidence for the lengthening of the prayer in the qiyam and the rukoo, rather, but not the sujood. So we have an evidence for lengthening the prayer in the qiyam and lengthening the rukoo, but we don't have an evidence for lengthening the sujood. And we also have an evidence that this lengthening is of different levels, it's of different stages. So the first part of the first rak'ah is the longest part that you lengthen, and then the second is the longest after that, and then the second rak'ah, the first part, is the longest part you lengthen, and then after that. The ninth issue that we have here is we have the issue of the khutbah. We have the issue of the khutbah, and that from the sunnah is for the imam to deliver a speech after the prayer. So he would pray with the people, and then he would deliver a khutbah in which he would give them advice and admonition, and he would encourage them to remember Allah, and he would remind them not to fall into these beliefs of shirk regarding the stars and the sun and the moon and so on. The 10th issue that we have is to remind ourselves that the Prophet ﷺ, he was an ordinary person, and from the point of his creation. And he was extraordinary in being a prophet and having revelation given to him. But he was an ordinary person in the way that he lived his life. He had a child who passed away. He felt sad for them. He cried for them. He had things that he didn't know about. There were, for example, he didn't know whether the punishment of Allah Azza wa Jal is going to come at a particular time or not. The Prophet ﷺ, in this you can see that he is an ordinary person in that regard. But the area where he is extraordinary is in his prophethood and in the revelation that is given to him. So some people might confuse this issue, and we see this. Some people may give the Prophet ﷺ some of the characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like knowing everything about the unseen, or like the fact that he didn't die or he doesn't die, and that he can see everything, and that he can hear everything, and that he knows everything. And some people may give the attributes that only belong to Allah Azza wa Jal to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But actually, as we know from this hadith as an evidence, and from many ayat in the Quran and elsewhere, that the Prophet ﷺ was created as a human being from the children of Adam, and the same things happened to him that happened to other human beings. like people passing away, like some difficulties happening, times where it was relatively easy, times where it was relatively difficult, and that he didn't know the unseen, or he's not present in every place, and likewise that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away like all human beings pass away. The 10th point or the 11th point that we can take from this is that the eclipse prayer can be prayed at the time when it is forbidden to pray. So there are times when it is forbidden to pray, but the eclipse prayer is not one of those, or is not included in that. So you can pray during the time when it would normally be forbidden for you, to pray. We do one more hadith inshaAllah ta'ala. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أنه قال ما هبت ريح قط إلا جثى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم على ركبتيه وقال اللهم اجعلها رحمة لا تجعلها عذابا رواه الشافعي والطبراني. This hadith is the hadith of Ibn Abbas رضي الله عنهما, that he said no wind blew strongly. When you have a strong wind. What do you have in the English there? No wind blew, or no strong wind, or what do you have? No wind ever blew. Okay, the meaning of it in any case is a strong wind, not the small amount, not like a breeze, a wind, a proper wind. No wind ever blew, except that the Prophet ﷺ fell down to his knees and said, "O Allah, make it a mercy and don't make it a punishment." So this is from the etiquettes of the blowing of the wind. When you get a strong blowing of the wind, that you ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make it a mercy and not to make it a punishment. And there are other du'as and other adhkar that you can say at this time that are of a similar wording, that are similar in wording to this. However, the key thing here, and the reason that Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar mentioned this hadith here in Buloogh al Maram, is that there is no prayer for the blowing of the wind. Meaning there is no prayer for an oncoming tornado or tsunami or any of these different things, gale force winds or anything like that. There is no prayer that is for that. There is no sort of wind prayer, or there's a prayer because there's a tornado coming, or there's a prayer because there's a very strong wind blowing and the houses are shaking. There is no prayer for that. But what there is for that is dua. So the Prophet ﷺ would fall to his knees and he would say, "Oh Allah, make it a mercy and don't make it a punishment." And that is because the wind brings one of two things. It either brings the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal, or it brings the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's sometimes people get confused. Like for example, the people who, when they saw it coming and along the valley, they saw the clouds and the wind was blowing the clouds along the valley. They said that this is, and they said, هذا عارض ممطرنا. This is like a wind bringing the clouds that is going to bring us rain. بل هو ما استعجلتم به. Rather, it is the punishment that you people thought was not going to happen to you, or you tried to bring upon yourself. And they used to say, "Bring the punishment of Allah if you're truthful. Bring the punishment of Allah if you're truthful." And when they saw the clouds come, they said, "Oh, this is rain. This is a rain that has come. This is an unexpected wind which has brought clouds that are going to rain upon us." And Allah said, "Bal huwa masta'jaltum bih." Rather, it is the same thing that you were saying that you were claiming for, or you were claiming would not happen, meaning the punishment of Allah Azza wa Jal. So because the wind can bring punishment and it can bring blessings, then the sunnah here is we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make it a blessing and not to make it a punishment. And likewise from the ayat that we can reflect upon also is we can reflect upon the ayat in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what it would be like if Allah made the night time last forever. If Allah made the night last forever until the day of judgment. Man ilahun ghayrullahi ya'tikum biya. Which God besides Allah would be able to bring you the light again? So this is also from the ayat that you reflect upon, when things like the eclipse happen, that if the light went away, there is nobody but Allah can take you out of that situation that you're in. And can you imagine what it would be like if there was never daylight again? So these are all things that we reflect upon. We have one more hadith to finish the chapter. وعنه رضي الله عنه أنه صلى في زلزلة 6 ركعات و4 سجدات وقال هكذا صلاة الآيات رواه البيهقي وذكر الشافعي عن علي مثله دون آخره. And it's narrated from him that he prayed in an earthquake 6 raka'at and 4 sajadat. So that if it was this 6 raka'at would be 3 plus 3. And 3 readings, 3 bowings, and 2 sajda in each raka'at. And 4 sajdas. And said, this is the prayer of the ayat, and the prayer of the signs of Allah. This is an athar, which is narrated from Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. But it's not narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he ever prayed any prayer other for the signs of Allah other than the eclipse prayer. So what we say here is, we say that there is no evidence to pray an earthquake prayer or a wind prayer or anything else. And that is why Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar brought it at the end of the chapter, after having brought the issue of not praying during the wind, is to clarify that there is not a sunnah from the Prophet ﷺ for praying during an earthquake or for praying during a windstorm or any other kind of similar event like a tsunami or anything similar to that. So that we say we suffice ourselves, inshaAllah ta'ala, with the eclipse prayer, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. So we'll conclude there, inshaAllah ta'ala. Next time we have the topic of al-istisqa, inshaAllah, and we'll be covering the topic of the prayer for rain, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best.